alaikum everyone. Welcome to our first annual postgraduate research symposium titled the PhD Insight Series. Thank you all for taking the time out today to attend this virtual conference. My name is Djama. I'm the head of operations for Somali academics and will be your host for today. So today's segment will consist of a series of talk from ex and current PhD students. The aim of this event is really to instill a sense of familiarity and confidence into prospective PhD students, giving them the necessary tools in order to apply for a PhD program successfully. So this event was really set back from the event we carried out last year titled the PhD Insight Day. And after receiving a great number of turnouts and so much positive feedback, we decided to continue this into a series. And matter of fact, two of the prospective PhD applicants that attended the event last year have successfully gone on to secure a PhD position and are actually on the panel here today. So stories like these show and highlight the importance of holding events such as this, because the underrepresentation of Somalis in research is very critical, and holding events like this will spark and inspire the next generation of Somali researchers to pursue a PhD program. And I hope the events that we're holding here today will shed some light onto why you should consider a PhD and how it can develop you as an individual and a researcher. So I would like to quickly just go through the schedule today. We will have two keynote speakers, Dr. Abdimajid, Osman, and Dr. Fahima Idiris. Each talk will take about 20 minutes, following a Q&A session at the end of each talk. Next, we will have Deyl Djama, who will shed some light on what a PhD entails and why you should consider pursuing a PhD program. Following on, we will have Faysal, who will discuss the application process. And lastly, we will have the panel discussion where we will talk with various PhD ex and current PhD students on how a PhD life is. I would like to just quickly go over the housekeeping rules. This webinar is recorded. It will be live streamed on our YouTube and Facebook channel. Please submit all your questions through the Zoom chatter box down below, or tag us on Twitter using our Twitter handle Somali Academics, or use our hashtag Somali Researchers. Please fill out the form, a survey form at the end to help us improve, and slides will be shared upon request. I just wanted to quickly thank all the amazing work Somali academics have been doing behind the scenes tirelessly to pull off this event, and all the wonderful applicants that registered and applied to contribute to this event. And all your this event wouldn't be possible without all your amazing contributions. So thank you very much. We strive for this virtual conference to be both enjoyable and informative to you all. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Dr. Abdimajid Osman. Dr. Osman is teaches medical genetics and bioinformatics and has over 10 years and 20 years of experience in teaching and medical research respectively. Dr. Osman, thank you very much for joining us today. Welcome.
First, thank you for inviting me to this session. I'm very happy to see so many young Somali academics on one session. I have never been before something like that, so I am very happy. And I would like to make a brief presentation of myself first in the next slide before I go through my academic journey and so on. So I was born, if you have this next slide, please. So I was born in a small town called Gardo in northeastern Somalia in the 60s. And the picture you see here is my school where I started class 1 first time. And I took this picture 3 years ago when I was there. It is no longer a school. It was now, and it's now an office government office. But it was only 4 rooms, 1 room for grade 1, 1 room for grade 2, and so on, only 4 classes. And at that time, it was most Somali children had no opportunity to go to schools at the time. So I was one of the lucky children who got that opportunity to go to school. So that's my background. I come from humble background. I was raised by a single mother. My father died when I was newly born. So, and then I went to my education up to secondary school, then came to Sweden in the mid-80s. And after a couple of years learning the language in Sweden, and as you may know, in Sweden, when you go to university, you have to learn first Swedish, and you also have to have also, it's expected that you have a good proficiency in English because all the teaching books are in English. So it was quite challenging to learn. I could speak some English, but not that much when I came to Sweden. So 2 languages and new environment and new country and everything. So I started my university education and I got my first bachelor in 1993, as you can see, from Gothenburg University. Then I got a master's in 96, and my thesis was a part of a paper published 1 year later, 97. That was my first publication based on my master's. And as I mentioned before, it was very challenging at the time. There were no many Black students at the Swedish universities. So I was the only Black student at my university back in 1990s. And there were no Somali students at all at Gothenburg University at the time. So it was quite tough, but I made it and I took my master's. And then I thought maybe I don't need to go to do much more. So I decided to get a job. And I worked, I started to work at AstraZeneca until 99. And I realized that if you don't have a PhD, you are supposed to do the dirt work at the lab. So you don't get much development and progress. So then I thought, oh, okay, maybe the PhD would be fine. So I moved to another city called Linköping University. Another city called Linköping, which is between Stockholm and Gothenburg. And I started to work as a clinical scientist first. And after a couple of or 3 years, I started a PhD education, which I completed 2007. I got a PhD in medicine or clinical chemistry. And it was my dissertation was mainly, or my PhD was mainly focused on pharmacogenetics of a drug called warfarin. Warfarin is a drug used for prophylaxis and treatment of thrombosis. And that the title you see there is the title of my PhD. And at the same time, I got married. By the way, my wife was living in London at the time, so she moved to Sweden. And then after my dissertation, directly after that, I was a conference in Geneva. It was, I think, the October or something like that in 2007. And I met, if we have the next slide. Yeah, so at the conference in Geneva, which was about thrombosis and hemostasis, I was in a lecture held by a professor called Willem Willem Ohan, who is original from Netherlands. And he was talking about a UK study about cardiovascular disease and genetics and so on. So it was very exciting. So after the lecture was finished, I spoke to him and asked some questions, which he answered. And then I asked if I could come to his lab to Cambridge. And he said, okay, that's a good idea. You can you can come. So it was just to arrange the finances and so on. So I came to Cambridge and stayed there 2008 and worked within a project which was also within the genetics of cardiovascular diseases within this, Wellcome Traffic Control Consortium. It's a very large consortium, UK-wide. I think it was about almost 50 research groups in the UK who was associated with that consortium. So it was everything was a very large scale. I was not used to work in such large scale projects. So I was there 2008, and if we take the next slide, I came back to Sweden, and I will talk about more of my research and so on later on. But after my postdoctoral stay in Cambridge, I continued to do my research, and 2014 I became associate professor, and the last year I became also something called adjunct professor, which is a hospital related professorship. So that is my academic journey, and now I would like to talk about how it was and what challenges was there and how the life was. So if we start my PhD, as I said, it was I was in the city I am now, Linköping University, where I did my PhD. So it was quite different research environment compared with Cambridge. So I was in a research group, quite small, about 4 or 5 PhD students, and my supervisor was he was a clinician at the same time. He was a professor. So the most the challenge I have as a PhD student was mainly my supervisor. To be honest, he was a very very weird person, but nice at the same time. He would give me freedom, so actually he didn't care what I did, so I could do whatever I wanted, and the money was no problem. So whatever idea I came and said I want to do this and this, he said okay, go ahead. And he was very busy, so he was not available. So that was the most the biggest challenge I had in my PhD studies. But something I learned, which was extremely valuable, was I became very independent researcher, and I will talk about that later on, which is very valuable. And I also were at many conferences, almost every other year, or every year I was some conference somewhere. So I was conferences in Australia, Japan, everywhere, almost in Europe, US, and so on. So I had also that possibility to attend many conferences, which is quite good as a PhD student. And at the same time, while I was a PhD student, I published 4 papers, and I know it's quite different from UK. I think in the UK, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think it's not necessary to have many publications or so. Anyway, as I remember from my time in Cambridge, it was not required, but maybe I'm wrong. But in Sweden and in other Scandinavian countries, you are expected to have publications before you make your dissertation. So it's mandatory to have published some papers. Yeah, here in Sweden. So I had 4 publications before I got my PhD. And the most important gain is in my time as a PhD student was, as I told, it was I got quite very some degree of independence. So I became very independent. So that was the most important. Next slide, please. And my postdoctoral time, as I mentioned, I was in Cambridge, and the good thing in Cambridge was that it was a very prestigious university, as you know. Everything was high quality research and so on. But the problems was also that everything was very high scale, too big. So you were just a tiny part of a bigger project. And the other thing was also I got a quite cultural shock, because in Cambridge everything was very hierarchical. So you had the professor top, and you had senior research associates, and then you had research associates, and under that you had PhD students and research assistants. And that kind of hierarchy I was not used to. In Sweden, we have a more equal society in this country, so it was quite shocking to me, but it was good time. And then my time after I came to Linköping, I started to start a new research, which was different from my supervisor. And as you know, the problem when you come to the same place where you did your PhD is that you have to have some independence from your former supervisor if you want to go forward to academic career. So that the challenges was to attract the funding. You have to start everything from scratch. But I had my independence, so it worked quite well. And I also started with international collaborations with professors in Canada, in Germany, and the US. So I was quite lucky to have that kind of contacts and collaborations. It enabled me to establish my research. And I also started to publish many publications without my former supervisor, and that is important to make your own career. You need to be independent from your former research, from your former supervisor, which was exactly what I did. And I finally established my own research group and so on, and I also got grants and so on. So that was the journey I had. Next slide, please. And my current research is about the genetics of thrombosis and hemostasis. If you know about thrombosis, thrombosis is a disease which you get if you know about blood clotting. So your blood needs to be clotted, but if you have too little of clotting, you get bleeding, and if you have too much clotting, you get thrombosis. So that's the thrombosis. I have also research on cancer-associated thrombosis, mainly brain cancer, and most of my research can be found at this link which you see on the screen. And this is the map of the city where I am, the arrow, Linköping. As you can see, it's between Stockholm and Gothenburg. And the upper picture to the right, that's the medical school. I am basically behind that building, another building behind that, where I have my lab and my office. And these are also the where I teach. And on the lower part of the picture, you see the hospital. The medical school is located in the area of the hospital, and the hospital is quite large. It's a very large hospital. It's a university hospital, and it's also regional hospital. So I work also there as a clinical scientist. So I have actually 3 jobs. One is research. I am a researcher. I'm also a professor, and I teach at the university, and I also work at the hospital as a clinical scientist. So that's what I do, basically. So that was a very short story about me and my academic background. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer. I would like to add that many people or many students do PhD, and that's very good. And there are 2 paths. Most people or most students do not go forward with academic career after PhD. I would say most of them, or perhaps 90%, go another path, maybe work at the industry or something like that. So it's a choice. It depends on your interest. It depends if you want to make a lot of sacrifice, because academic path is very challenging. It's very tough, and you need to make a lot of sacrifice to be successful.
Thank you very much, Dr. Osman. It's been very enlightening, especially how you started your journey from Somalia to England, Sweden to England. I feel like that resonates a lot with a lot of people, because our parents were born in down here. So it's like, I feel like a lot of us can relate to that, especially me. I'm from Sweden, but live here. I was born in Sweden, but live here. So mashallah, it was really interesting. And I like the idea how you spoke about you went to a conference, and because of networking, you got an opportunity to work in Cambridge.
Yes.
Right. So yeah, it just highlights the importance of networking and how it can create even more opportunities. How did you find, I know that you said there's a hierarchy in England as compared to Sweden, but which one would you prefer, like in terms of progressing wise in your career, England or Sweden?
Yeah, thank you. What I said was that I was quite shocked, because I was not used to a very hierarchical system. I am originally from Somalia, or I am from Somalia, and Somalia is a very equal society. Maybe you know that the Somali people is a very equal society. I mean that anthropologists and even historians have said that many times. We are a very egalitarian society. And then I came to Sweden, which is also very egalitarian society. So in some way, my background in Somalia and in Sweden are almost similar. And then I came to UK, which was quite different. But in academic point of view, I would say that the UK has very more advanced research, especially in academia. I'm not talking about only Cambridge, I'm talking other universities. So I would say that there is more opportunity to be successful in UK than in Sweden. So in that case, I would prefer to have academic career in UK than in Sweden. But that was just the cultural difference between different countries I was talking about.
Someone asked, do you think the freedom in your research, especially as a PhD student, affected your work, your research?
Sorry, what did you say?
Do you think the freedom in your research, especially as a PhD student, affected your research?
Absolutely. I would say that there are two types of supervisors. One type is the supervisor that want to control you, They want to have 100% control. That's not good. And there is another type of supervisor, which is a one that don't care at all. So I would say that something in the middle is good. My supervisor, actually, he didn't care, but he did care in some extent, I would say. So I got a lot of freedom, and I think that was very important for me to be independent later on in my academic career. So I would say yes,
100%.
it affected me my academic career. Yes.
Perfect. And someone else said, why do you think a lot of PhDs don't carry down the route of academia?
Yes, that is also what I think I mentioned. It's first you need to have the interest. If you need to, I would say, to be burning for research and this stuff and things like that. If you don't have that that mindset, then that's not something for you. But if you have that that kind of mindset, you like research, you like things like that, you like to do new things, then it's a very it's very nice, very giving to be in academia. But at the same time, it's you need to make a lot of sacrifices. It needs that. It's not like a work 9 to 5 work. It is 24 hours work. Sometimes, yeah, you got up in the middle of the night and you have an idea and you write in a notebook, okay, this is interesting, I will try to investigate that tomorrow. So it's that, yeah. So you have that you need to have that interest, and you need to make that sacrifice. And I think many people don't have that, and then they think, okay, PhD is enough for me, and I will do something else.
100%. And to be honest, like most people go for industry for money-wise. The money's a lot better apparently in industry compared to academia.
Yes.
But
yes.
Each to their own. There's another question that came up saying, how did you come to choose your research topic or interest?
Yeah, that was quite accidental. I think it was not a choice, because while I was working at the hospital, I met my becoming supervisor, and I was interested. I had some interest in biochemistry. My background was biochemist. I was biochemist, and the coagulation system is a very complex, and it's something I like to work with. So it was quite accidental, I would say. It was not something I was planning to do. It just became like that, yeah.
Okay. We will just pick one last question. Did you suffer as a result of your race, which impacted your career?
Sure. Yes, of course. I'm not sure, or I don't know how much it impacted, but I'm sure that it's quite tough to be black in Sweden. I think it's the same in the UK, but I think it's more tougher in Sweden, because in this country, black people were not. I mean, we're not common here. When I came in the 80s, it was quite rare, very rare to see black people. So, of course, I experienced a lot of, I would say, racism, but that was mostly in the early days when I was my undergraduate university. Yes, I had some comments from professors, from students, and so on. But I knew that that wouldn't affect me. You need to have
strong, yeah.
Strong, yes, yeah, to survive. Yeah. But of course, yes, yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Osman. You've got lots of other questions, but we will definitely answer them during the panel discussion at the end. We're just going to move on to our next keynote speaker, Dr. Fahima Idiris. Dr. Fahima Idiris is a process chemist and has obtained her PhD in synthetic organic chemistry and drug discovery, and is a recipient of multiple academic achievements awards and prizes at prestigious UK PhD events. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Fahima Idiris. Welcome to this event.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for the kind invitation to talk to you a little bit about my PhD. So I'm just going to share my screen, if you could let me. Yeah. Okay, so I'll be telling you a little bit about my PhD journey and sort of beyond. So I'm 2 years post submitting my thesis, but about a year or so from my actual PhD graduation. So I'll sort of split this talk into 4 sections, which sort of defined why I decided to do a PhD and why I stayed in academia to do postdocs before moving into industry. And in terms of my background, I started off by doing my undergraduate studies at Queen Mary, University of London, where I obtained an MSci in pharmaceutical chemistry, graduating in 2015. I followed that with a PhD in synthetic organic chemistry, also at Queen Mary, but I moved to a different group where I did my PhD studies, and I'll go into a lot more detail about my PhD. But I followed my PhD with 2 postdocs, first at Imperial College, working in collaboration with the pharmaceutical company Bayer in Germany, and followed that with another postdoc doing something slightly different in drug discovery, where I was based at the UCL School of Pharmacy until June of this year. But in terms of my PhD journey, it all started for me back when I was doing my undergraduate studies. So I was studying for an MSci in pharmaceutical chemistry. And in terms of career aspirations, I always wanted to work in industry, to work in research and development. And during my degree, it really became clear to me that I really liked chemistry and I enjoyed being in the lab the most. And I was very fortunate in that I enjoyed my course, but I also did really well in examinations. And that meant that Queen Mary rewarded me in terms of my examination grades with research, scholarships, bursaries, and also academic achievement awards for every year of my study. And what was really nice was in my second year, they gave me a research bursary, which allowed me to work in the research labs at Queen Mary, where I was paired up with an academic supervisor, and it was sort of my first experience in a research laboratory. So before that, I'd only been in undergraduate labs. And I got to work alongside PhD students and master's students, have my own project for 2 months. And I got to see what day-to-day life could be. And I really enjoyed that experience. I had a great supervisor, so her name was Dr. Natalie Labrassa. And I got a lot of independence for someone who was just in their second year of their studies. So I followed that with another research placement in the summer of 2014 when I was in my third year, focusing in on organic chemistry. And that's sort of when I realized that I really liked organic chemistry, developing new reactions. And during my final year master's project, I worked with the same supervisor. And this was sort of the time when I started thinking more about my career, and she suggested that I think about doing a PhD. Because she thought I was the sort of person who'd be suited to academic research. And Queen Mary also offered me the opportunity to go and present at a research conference for undergraduate students from all over the UK, where I represented Queen Mary, and I managed to win a talk prize there. So I realized that I did like the lab aspect, but I also liked going to conferences and talking about chemistry and talking about research. And this is when I sort of started thinking, should I do a PhD or should I just go and get a job? So in terms of doing a PhD, obviously now I know that you should have a couple of reasons for doing a PhD, because it can be very difficult and you will need something to keep you motivated over those 4 years. And for me in particular, I decided to pursue a PhD because I was interested in the chemistry that I was doing, and I wanted to sort of make a contribution to the field. But at the time, I started thinking a lot more about academia and whether I wanted to take that career route. And for that, you do need a PhD. But in industry as well, you do need a lot of transferable skills. So I thought if I did decide to make that change, I wouldn't be losing out on doing a PhD. So obviously a PhD is a big commitment. In the UK, is between 3.5 to 4 years of your life. So you need to be in it for the right reasons, not just to get that title of doctor, because after a while, the novelty of that does wear off. So it is a test of endurance. So if you are thinking of doing a PhD, I would say, try and come up with a couple of reasons for why you're doing it, because you need something that will keep you motivated over those years. So in terms of my PhD research, without going into too much detail, because it is very heavy on the theory, I was working on the development of new synthetic methodologies, so developing new reactions, particularly focusing in on mechanisms. And we were interested in making compounds which were relevant for the pharmaceutical industry, essentially. So we developed a completely novel reaction, and we published this in my 3rd year of my PhD. To sum up my PhD, essentially, I completed my PhD within 3 years. And in that time, I published 2 journal papers and currently got 2 in preparation. I got 1 journal cover for my project, which I'll show you a little bit later on. And I attended 12 conferences, each of which I presented at, either doing posters or talks, and I went to a summer school in my 1st year. I won 2 talk awards, 2 poster prizes, and 3 travel grants. I got to travel all across the UK from places such as Swansea, Oxford, Bristol, all around London. And I also got to go to America in my final year, where I went and presented in Boston and got to go to New York as well. So I've done more than 120 hours of laboratory demonstrating to undergraduate students in all kinds of topics, varying from physical chemistry to organic chemistry. And I've done more than 100 hours of teaching and mentoring. And I've supervised 8 project students, so master's students, bachelor students, and summer students in the research laboratories. So you can see that a PhD is not just about you locking yourself away in your lab and doing research. There's a lot of other things that you have to do as well on top of that, but they're very rewarding, and they are, they sort of help you to develop all those skills that you'll need for any job post-PhD. And this is my journal cover. So every time you open my journal article, you'll see this cover, which I got to design with one of the postdocs in my group and a master's student who actually drew it. And it's essentially a play on the reaction that I developed during my PhD. So we had like a lot of fun just designing these monkeys. And I actually got to keep a hard copy of the cover that the journal sent us when we published this work. So it's a nice sort of reminder of my PhD. So in terms of finishing off the PhD, the last few months are the most important. So I was on a 3-year funded scholarship. And like most people who are funded for 3 years, I thought I'd be in the lab for 3 years, and then I'd spend maybe 2 or 3 months writing up and submitting. But that all changed for me in my 3rd year of my PhD. So I was about 2 years and 10 months in, and I was offered a postdoctoral position at Imperial College. But I was told that I had to start in October of 2018, which was when my funding for my PhD would be finishing. Which meant that I had to submit within that 3 years. So it was a real race to the finish. I had about a month to write up my thesis, submit it, and finish up at Queen Mary, and then move to Imperial. And I also had to go to America for a big conference at the time. But I managed to do it, alhamdulillah. And then I literally submitted on a Thursday, cleaned out on a Friday, and then on a Monday, I was a postdoc at Imperial. And then obviously submitting is not the end of the story. I had to do my PhD viva, which I had in December of 2018. So postdocing, revising for a PhD viva, went back to Queen Mary, passed my PhD viva. And I was very lucky to pass with no corrections, which meant that I could focus on just being a postdoc. Went back to Imperial, finished postdocing there on a Friday, and then got another position at UCL where I became a postdoc there. But you can see that I only graduated in July 2019. So there was a long period between actually having your PhD viva and graduating, and that's because there are 2 graduation ceremonies, and I missed the cutoff for the November graduation. So I waited till July and I was on my 2nd postdoc position. So you can imagine it all looks great, but it was a very stressful few months, but it all worked out in the end. So this period of time, obviously it's good to plan ahead in terms of jobs and positions, and to network and to try and get connections so that you have something to do between submitting your thesis and ultimately graduating. And I got my first postdoc position through networking, but my 2nd postdoc, I applied for an advertised position. So it's really important that you keep those connections that you make at conferences. So it all looks great, obviously, because people will just see the successes that you've had in your life. But a PhD is very difficult. Everyone's journey is very different. There was hundreds and hundreds of failed experiments in that time, a lot of hours in the lab, a lot of hard work and discipline. Organic chemistry is not easy. You have to do hundreds of reactions before you get one hit that works, and then you have to optimize it. But a PhD in any subject requires a lot of dedication, a lot of hard work. So that's sort of something you need to be prepared for when you do go into a PhD or a postdoc. And we all have to make sacrifices in order to achieve our goals. So after my PhD, I sort of followed that with postdoctoral experience. So for most of you will know what a postdoc is, but if you don't, it's basically someone who's got a PhD and holds a temporary position at some sort of institution. That could be an academic institution, or it can be in industry as well. So there are a lot of industrial postdocs at the moment. So it's a weird time in your life because you're sort of in a job, but you're looking for another job at the end of it. There's a lot of uncertainty, but it's great because you have a lot of freedoms in terms of the research that you're doing. With a PhD, you're sort of bound to the thesis. The thesis is always your goal, but with a postdoc, you have that pressure taken off you a little bit. So in terms of the pros and cons of doing a postdoc, so as I mentioned, you can shape your own research. If something is not working, you can change direction very quickly because you're not thinking about having to write that all up afterwards. There are a lot of career development opportunities available, especially things such as teaching and mentoring of PhD students, which is quite good. You can form new collaborations and make new connections with people. So if you are considering a postdoc, I would advise you to move groups, move institutions if you can, because that's how you'll broaden your network and that will help you in your career, especially if you're planning on staying in academia. As with a PhD, you get flexible working hours, although that can mean that you are working a lot more hours than a normal job, and you do get to travel quite a lot, which is one of the perks that I got as a postdoc, which was quite nice. In terms of the cons, I mean, you need to realize that postdocs are fixed term contracts. My first postdoc was only funded for 5 months. So you need to always be constantly thinking about what you're going to do next, what your next step is, and that can be quite difficult and quite stressful. It is difficult to maintain a work-life balance, even though the hours are flexible. You typically have to work a lot harder than you were doing your PhD because you have to achieve a lot more in a short space of time and you have a lot more responsibilities. Obviously, there's no guarantee of an academic position. As Dr. Osman already mentioned, about 80% of postdocs don't go on to get an academic position. So you need to be aware of that and sort of plan for what you're going to do if you don't get that funding. And there isn't a guarantee to get mentoring. When you are a postdoc, you are considered to be a lot more skilled and a lot more independent. So if you do need a little bit more help, depending on your institution and your supervisor, you might not get the mentoring or training that you need. And your job requirements can be quite non-specific. So you may end up doing things and having responsibilities that you hadn't planned on. But I did a postdoc because I really loved doing organic chemistry. I liked the research aspect and I like working on something which is quite challenging. And that's sort of what drew me to this position at Imperial College, which I actually got through networking because I'd met my supervisor at the time at many conferences. And I was in London, obviously, so that helped, so I could start the position very quickly. And we were working with Bayer, the pharmaceutical company, to develop these small building blocks, which they were interested in for their medchem programs. So incorporating these into pharmaceutically active compounds. And I was working with 2 PhD students on this, and we published this work very recently. So that was quite rewarding. And for those of you who don't know what organic chemistry is like, you get to make a lot of cool crystals when things work, and there's a lot of purifications as well involved. But I really like taking pictures of things that I'd made in the lab and all the colorful stuff when it looks nice. Most of the time it doesn't look as nice as this though. So then I followed that with a postdoc at UCL. So for this postdoc, I wanted to try something a little bit different. I'd been focusing more on like fundamental reactions and reaction development. So I wanted to work on something a bit more applied. And that's why I was drawn to this position at UCL School of Pharmacy, where I was working on making molecules which target bacterial infections, essentially, where one of my projects was focused on tuberculosis. And what was different about this postdoc position was that I had a lot more responsibility in terms of lab management. I was involved in supervising PhD and undergraduate students, more than 10 of them in the lab. I was also involved in buying, maintaining equipment, and setting up a lab, which was quite nice. So it was a lot of responsibility, but I gained a lot of leadership skills and management skills and organizational skills during my time at UCL, which I'm really grateful for. And one of the perks of doing a postdoc over just over a year and a half at UCL was I got to travel, and I got to make some great friends. So what was nice at UCL was it was the first time I worked in a very, very diverse lab. It was the first time I was in a lab with fellow Muslims as well, and another African. So UCL was great in that sense, and we got to go to Greece in the summer of 2019 and travel to Cambridge and also to conferences in London where I got to present. And I'm still friends with a lot of the people that I met during my PhDs and my postdoc. So it's important to keep those connections because you spend a lot of time with your fellow PhD students and postdocs. So in terms of my tips for PhD students, obviously I've been a PhD student, but I've also been a postdoc, and I learned a lot of things as a postdoc, and I realized how I can help the PhD students around me so that they don't make the same mistakes that I did, or to help them speed up with their research. And I think the 5 main points are: you need to have a good relationship with your supervisors, whether that's your principal investigator or the fellow postdoc who's looking after you, because once you have those expectations clear, it makes your PhD go a lot more smoothly for you. And once you have that communication, that dialogue. You need to be presenting at conferences and trying to publish your work at least. This will help you to develop the skills that you need for your Viva, especially because you'll be presenting your research, and it gives you the skills that you'll need for any job, essentially. Try and get some teaching and mentoring experience. Here in the UK, it's pretty good because there are a lot of opportunities to demonstrate and to help with workshops and tutorials. And you have to remember that at some point in your career, you will be supervising or managing people. And it's really nice that during your PhD, you do get a lot of experience doing that. And try and maintain a healthy work-life balance. So it's very easy to get caught up with doing many long hours and working every day of the week, but it is important so that you have that clear distinction between time for work and time for rest and social life as well. And I think one that's really important is not to compare yourself to others, and don't struggle on your own. Everyone's PhD journey is different. Everyone will have ups and downs. And just because somebody else's research is going a lot better than yours doesn't mean that you're not doing well. It might just be that your project is at a different point in that time. And it's okay to ask for help. Especially, I would urge you to ask for help from postdocs in your group. They've been there before, they know all the tips and tricks. And that's something that people tend to overlook. You're not bothering them. They are there to help you. And try and have a plan B to an academic career. If things don't go your way, you know, you can always go to industry, or you can go do something else and you can come back to academia. You don't have to go straight in. Everyone's path is slightly different. So just try and keep an open mind, and think about the skills that you've got and what sort of job they would make you suitable for. In terms of like the transferable skills that you learn during your PhD, so there's obviously quite a few. I think the main ones are your written and your verbal communication. I mean, you present at conferences, you write reports, you write your thesis, and being able to disseminate such large information to a variety of different groups, from experts to non-experts, is really important, and it's a skill that you'll gain throughout your PhD. Especially for those of you in the sciences and engineering, analytical and problem solving are very key. During my PhD, I mean, I'd go through large amounts of data. Every time I make a compound, have I made the right thing? Have I made something else? Trying to figure that out. It's a sort of skill that you just learn with time, and that's very important for any job. Leadership and interpersonal, you'll work in a research group, you'll be supervising other students. As you become more senior within your group, when you're in your third year, fourth year, you get a lot more responsibility, and sort of those decisions that you make will help you manage a group in the future. So things such as project management and organization, obviously you've got your research project, and as you get into it, you're sort of driving that forward. It's not your supervisor is just there to help you. So you learn more about project management and organization. Research and information management. This is something that's very similar to project management, but it becomes a lot more important when you're writing your thesis. How are you going to organize all of those thoughts? And in terms of referencing and things like that, which is really key, and you'll learn that throughout your PhD. I think a PhD and a postdoc naturally make you a lot more adaptable and flexible. It's just something that you have to develop as things don't work well, like you're doing an experiment, you get something completely different, you might have to change your complete direction of your PhD, and it just makes you a lot more flexible in that sense. And that's really valued by a lot of employers, someone who can just switch and move on to something else very quickly. So networking is key. Networking is really important, but what's more important is actually keeping those connections. Anyone can go to a conference and talk to a lot of people, but if you don't follow up, there's no point, especially you've basically just wasted that effort. Networking is also key because a lot of our fields tend to be quite narrow and quite small. So I actually work with a lot of people that I met at conferences during my PhD and my postdoc. And it's quite interesting that you realize that your field is actually a lot smaller than you thought. So it's important that you make a good impression, and it's important that you try and keep in touch with those people, whether that's just on LinkedIn or on Twitter. You know, just get yourself out there, especially when you're Muslim and you're Black. You'll likely be the only person in that conference. So people will remember you. So it's it can be a good thing and a bad thing in a way, but it is very important to make a good impression. And one thing that most people don't talk about is emotional intelligence. This is something you learn, especially if you work in a lab, and it's something that I learned during my PhD and my postdoc. When experiments are not going very well, or things have not been working for months, being able to keep calm, keep cool, especially when you are managing other people and you're responsible for people who are a lot more junior than you, and helping them out and not letting the stress overcome you. And that's something that will be valued by any employer, and especially as you become a manager and you manage people, being able to keep calm under stressful situations. And that's something you really learn during your PhD and your postdoc. So where am I now currently? So I left UCL at the beginning of June of this year, and I joined a company called Amran in Hertfordshire, where I am an associate principal scientist in process chemistry. So I'm doing what I had always wanted to do, which is to spend 90% of my time in the lab, and I work on the development of chemical processes. So we synthesize drug molecules up to kilogram scale for preclinical and clinical trials. And a lot of the people that I work with have PhDs and postdoc experience, the majority actually, because we use all of the skills that we learn, especially the chemistry. I won't go into too much detail about what I do in terms of my job, but if you are a chemist, especially an organic chemist or an analytical chemist, and you're interested in transitioning to industry, do feel free to get in touch with me on LinkedIn or on Twitter. And yeah, if you have any questions, I can then let you know about that. But yeah, that's my last slide. And thank you for the invitation to share my experiences in academia.
Thank you very much, Fahima. Honestly, like, you've done so much. I'm just so surprised because I'm in my third year and I haven't done as much as you've done. So, mashallah. How did you? I didn't know this, that you could jump. You can start postdoc straight away without passing your viva.
Yeah, it's pretty common actually. I always thought you'd have to do your viva, but when I was coming towards the end of my PhD, I was told it's pretty normal. It's just that you need to submit your thesis.
Oh, okay. They've probably seen all your hard work and they thought they don't want to miss out on this opportunity. But, mashallah, honestly. So we've got a couple of questions. I'm just going to take a few and then we can just answer the rest on the panel discussion later on, inshallah. So someone asked, how big was the jump between being a PhD student and doing a postdoc?
For me, it was quite a big jump. So when I was a PhD student, I was in a group where there were 2 other postdocs, and most of the PhDs were in the same year as me. So in terms of lab responsibilities, everything was sort of equal in terms of like how we shared stuff. But then when I became a postdoc, especially at UCL, I was given a lot of responsibility. I had a lot of people to look after, a lot of questions, and I also had to do my own research. So I realized I was working a lot more hours to try and fit that in. And I sort of learned that I had to fit in people's questions around my time when I was doing experiments. So there was times when I'd be doing an experiment, there's 2 or 3 people around me asking me questions, and you learn to sort of tell them to organize your time around helping others. So it is a big jump. You have to be very patient, and you have to be very calm as well. There's going to be a lot of pressure on you. I found that the expectation in terms of the work was a lot more. When you're a postdoc, you're expected to do a lot more experiments. And in terms of your knowledge as well, you're expected to be a source of knowledge for all the PhD students and all the undergraduates, which can be a big responsibility. But with time, you become a little bit more comfortable, and it's okay to be nervous in the beginning. It sort of comes to you. And when you become a postdoc, you realize you become a lot more confident in your knowledge as well, especially after you pass your viva. You feel like, oh, I actually know this. But sometimes you're like, okay, maybe I don't know exactly what I'm doing, but it's okay. So yeah, you just get used to it after a while.
Can I ask a quick question as well? So you talked a lot about networking and forming connections. And one thing I tend to find is that within academia, a lot of it is centered in environments which are not necessarily Muslim friendly. So they might have a drinking reception after a conference, or they might go to a local pub after a talk, for instance. So what were your experiences in dealing with that and still being able to form the necessary connections that you need?
Yeah, so I was in organic chemistry, which is known to be very non-Muslim. Every conference I went to, I didn't meet any other Muslims. Most of the time I was the only Black person. There weren't even any Asians. It was just Chinese students, and there was always a drinks reception. And I used to just go home, and I would go and pray during my breaks and just find somewhere and ask someone, could I have somewhere to pray for a few minutes? But none of it really hindered me. I always used to think of it as, I'm going to do my best. If I'm presenting a poster, when people come to my poster, I'm just going to present my research as best as I can. If I'm giving a talk, I'm just going to be confident. I was always the only hijabi in the room. There was only one conference I went to and there was one other hijabi. And I just thought, you know, people can focus on my religion or they can focus on the chemistry. It's not really my problem. I'm just going to try my best and I'm going to please Allah. You know, I'm not going to do something that's outside of Islam. And it worked out fine. I never went to any of the drinks receptions. I never went to a pub. I never went to do any sort of social activities, but people still noticed my skills and saw the potential in me, which I'm really grateful for. And obviously, you know, you sacrifice those things for Allah and for your religion, and you know, you will do fine in the end. So I wouldn't really worry about things like that. I mean, the first time I worked in a group with Muslims was at UCL, and that was my second postdoc. I hadn't really met any other Muslims, only during my PhD. Kaltum, who's on this chat, she was the first, like, in my second year I met her, and I was like, oh, Somali and in the same department as me. It was just a strange experience. So yeah, you will face those challenges, but I think just be strong and just, you know, have faith in Allah and you'll be fine.
Can I relate to that? Yeah, absolutely. I agree 100% with Dr. Fahima Idiris. I mean, I have also the same experience. You go to conferences, you meet colleagues, and sometimes you end up the evening in a dinner that people are drinking alcohol, but you don't need to do that. You can still be a Muslim and do your duties as Muslim, and at the same time you are connecting to scientists around the world. So I think there are no contradictions at all.
Yeah, I think even now where I work, I'm the only Muslim, like the only practicing Muslim. So when I started on my first day, I asked if there was somewhere for me to pray. And initially they said I could pray in a small room. And then afterwards they found out there was actually a prayer room on site, but I'm the only person using it out of like more than 200 people. So as long as you're brave enough to ask for those sort of things, now I'm just upfront with it. I need a place to pray. People are willing to, you know, accommodate you around your religion. And I always think of it as, if they're willing to give people a 5-minute smoking break, I mean, why can't I go pray for 5 minutes a day? And in terms of the drinking, I think if you're very upfront about it, I will always say, I'm not going to a pub. I don't care if that's the social activity. I'm not going. I can have lunch with you, but, you know, I'm not going to do something that's against my religion. People are more accepting of you if you hold on to your views as well.
Yeah, thank you. That's a perfect answer to my question. I've got one more as well, if I can ask. So how big of a jump was it in terms of going from, so the field you went in to do your postdoc, was that similar to what you did in your PhD, or was it a completely different field?
So my first postdoc was similar in terms of it was reaction development, but it was a different area of organic chemistry. So I wouldn't say it was a massive jump. It was just a few days of like trying to read up on that chemistry and trying to learn that. My second postdoc was a bit more of a jump because it was medicinal chemistry. So there was a lot of biology and my background is completely in chemistry. So I found myself before meetings having to read a lot more about the biology just so that I could understand what the collaborators were talking about. So that was a little bit more difficult. So it was a bit of a jump in that sense. But I think it's normal when you're doing a postdoc to do something that's quite different to your PhD. So don't ever feel like you don't know everything, even if it's in your own field. Everyone feels like they don't know what they're doing, and that's completely normal. It doesn't go away when you become a postdoc. You still feel like how you did during your PhD.
Thank you for that.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Dr. Fahima. You've shed some light on all sorts of things, from career-wise to deen-wise. Like, I really like the idea when you talked about asking somewhere to pray and stuff, because you shouldn't never compromise your deen. You don't see other people compromising their faiths. And so, mashallah, thank you so much for your talk. There's so many questions that are coming through, but we will continue them in the panel discussion, inshallah. So we're just gonna share my screen. Just gonna go forward with our next talk. which will be given by Deyl Djama. He's a first-year PhD student studying Huntington disease using electrophysiology and various imaging techniques, and presented previous work at national conferences and has received several awards and publications. He's also our head of digital for Somali academics, our very own Deyl Djama. Welcome, Deyl.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me. And so I'm just gonna get straight into the talk that I'll be delivering. I'm just gonna share my screen. Yeah. Yeah, is that visible?
Yes.
Yeah, and I just want to say amazing talks by Dr. Osman and Dr. Idiris. I think they gave very good talks, and they will, and their talks would, there'll be a good supplement to the talk I'll be giving now, which is what is a PhD and should you do one? So there might be some repetition between the points that Dr. Idiris raised and Dr. Osman, but yeah, this should be quite a comprehensive overview of what a PhD is and the factors you should take into consideration if you plan on doing a PhD. So just to start off, what is a PhD? So I think most academic institutions across the world, it's the highest university degree that is awarded by those institutions, and it usually takes 3 to 4 years to complete it if you're doing it full-time, or 5 to 7 years if you're doing it part-time. And that's at least here in the UK and Europe, and I think Australia as well. But in the US, you can go on doing PhD for up to 5 to 7 years full time. And a PhD primarily involves the production of original research. And so we're just going to talk about like how original is the research that we're talking about. So I think some of you might have already seen this analogy, but I'm just going to run through it quickly. So if you imagine that there's a circle that contains the whole of human knowledge, everything that is known to man, and that's that circle. And once you finish primary school, you learn a little bit about human knowledge, what we know, etc. And then as you grow older and you complete the high school degree, you know a bit more about how things work and how the world is. And then with your bachelor's degree, you end up taking a subject or two and kind of going a bit deeper into that field. And then with a master's, you kind of branch out within that 1 or 2 subjects that you're interested in, and you kind of deepen that specialty. And you'd see that during a master's degree, you end up reading, and even your bachelor's as well, you end up reading a lot of research papers, a lot of papers that are being published like over the past 5-6 years, and those are novel. Those are novel findings, and reading those papers, that really takes you to the edge of human knowledge, and it really shows you what we don't know and how we can make sense of these questions that we don't have answers to. And once you're at that edge, you push that boundary for a few years until you make a little dent in that boundary. And that little dent that you make in the boundary is a PhD, essentially. And once you're at this stage, you've probably discovered a few things, or you've probably contributed to our understanding of how things work or how the world is organized, etc. And over here on the right, you can see that it really appears that you've made a massive contribution. But once we take a step back, you can see that it's only a very small dent in what we know as human beings. And that's not to discourage you, but it's the fact that when a lot of people do PhDs and they all like do little, they kind of makes some indentations to human knowledge, the circle ends up expanding, and the diameter of the circle expands, and what we know as humans being collectively expands as well. So don't lose sight of the bigger picture. And this analogy also goes to show how specialized and how specialized PhDs can really be. So I'm just going to go over some of the opportunities that you might expect as a PhD student. And so firstly, you're able to collaborate with other researchers and build invaluable networks. I think Dr. Idiris really touched upon that as she managed to secure several postdoc positions with just through connecting with people at conferences. So that's a really invaluable asset that you can have in your repertoire moving forward. Second, you get to teach undergrads and master students. Again, Dr. Idiris really touched upon that, and this goes in the form of giving lectures, giving lab demonstrations, supervising projects, etc. And thirdly, you're able to mentor and carry out outreach programs. And this is especially because, especially now as even as Somali academics, because there's a lack of Somali PhD students out there, we're able to kind of reach back out to the community and inspire them to kind of pursue PhDs and really show them that there is a space out there for you. And fourth, this is quite an interesting one, because once you're doing your bachelor's degree and master's degrees, you have access to quite a lot of training resources, to be honest. And those are in the form of journals, journal articles, certain softwares for statistical analysis, and hardware in the lab that you might be using. So once you finish your bachelor's or master's degree, you won't have access to those resources anymore. But being a PhD student really gives you that access to carry out great research. And that's a really good asset that people end up, that's something that people do notice once they finish their undergrads and masters, that they can't read journals that they might be interested in. And they usually cost in the hundreds of pounds or dollars. And fourthly, or fifth, you're able to travel nationally and internationally, and that will be free as well. That will be covered by the university. So you'd probably be going to international conferences, or you might be doing fieldwork as part of your PhD. So yeah, if that's something that interests you, then that's really good. So I'm just going to go over some reasons why you should do a PhD, and then after I'll do some reasons why you should not do a PhD. So these are the reasons that you should do a PhD. The most obvious one is that your career requires one. So if you want to stay in academia, for example, or go into industry, or go to like something research oriented or an NGO, then in order to kind of reach a more senior position, you need to do a PhD. Secondly, and this is something that kind of I've heard from a lot of people who are considering doing PhDs, and is that they're just super passionate about a topic and they just really want to go all in and research that area. And they're really dedicated to putting at least 3 to 4 years of work into that project. Thirdly, this is something that I've come across as well, is that challenge of really steep learning curve, where people really want to develop new skills and kind of take their personal and professional skills to the next level, and a PhD can offer that. And finally, it's very fulfilling, because at the end of the day, you are contributing to what we know as human beings, and you'll be publishing papers, you'll be teaching people about your discoveries, and that's very fulfilling and rewarding, not only in this life, but in the hereafter as well. So some of the reasons that you should not do a PhD. I can literally go on all day for reasons you should not do a PhD. But I think the one that stood out most is that people are under the impression that a PhD is a golden ticket to a 6-figure salary. That is false. That is not the case. And people have this idea that the more degrees you have, the more money you earn. That is not the case. So for example, just to illustrate this point, for example, let's say that you're a master's student now, and you go into do a PhD, which is 3 to 4 years. And on the other hand, there's another master's student who went straight into his line of work or their line of work. And they end up gaining 3 to 4 years of employability and of employment, and they have like inside knowledge of the industry, of the system, and how it works. Then once you come out and finish your PhD, they will be much more employable than the person who went and done that PhD. And this may not be the case for all industries and sectors, but that generally does tend to be the case. Secondly is the doctor title. To be honest, this should be the least of your concerns. because you actually see people kind of pursuing PhDs kind of for the perceived social prestige that it brings, or kind of for the title and for the show, basically, and that's the wrong reason to do a PhD. Thirdly, peer pressure, and this is quite unfortunate because a person might come from a family of kind of professionals, etc., and they might be forced or nudged to do a PhD. Or on the other hand, you might have several friends doing PhDs, and you might want to kind of join the hype, and that's not a great reason to do a PhD. Fourth, a PhD can be isolating and difficult at times, and this is mainly because you're the one pushing that boundary there, and no one has really been that far yet, and that includes your supervisors as well. So you might have to kind of end up teaching your supervisor. I know it sounds weird, but you end up teaching your supervisor like what the research that you're doing, what you found, your results, discuss that with them, and that can be very, very isolating at times, and you have to kind of come up with theories and kind of really take initiative. And finally, is the irregular working hours, and this can be quite difficult because I think that it's already been touched upon, but you might end up coming in for weekends, for example, to run experiments, or you might have a deadline and you might need to work late till night. And it can be really difficult, especially if you have other personal responsibilities, whether it's family or other activities that you're engaged in. So kind of managing that work-life balance can be quite tricky at times. So for example, if you prefer something a bit more structured, where you just leave your work at work and then just come home to be at home and enjoy your life, it might be quite difficult. So I'm just going to finish off with several questions that you should ask yourself, and you should be as honest as possible with yourself, because I was in this position same time last year, and I had to think about if I really wanted to do a PhD or not. And these are some of the questions that I asked myself, and I think everyone should ask themselves if they want to do a PhD. And firstly, is like, why are you thinking of doing a PhD in the first place? What caused it to cross your mind and consider it? And secondly, this is quite an interesting one, because the second point, because there's people out there who prefer to be quote unquote generalists, and they like to touch upon from different disciplines, and kind of they prefer breadth of knowledge over depth, if that makes sense. And being kind of specialized into doing a PhD, they don't really enjoy that. So try to kind of look at your work style and see if that's something that you may be interested in. And thirdly is, how would a PhD supplement your career plans? Because there may be times where you can actually reach your destination, your career destination, your career goal, without doing a PhD. So if that's something that is possible, try to explore that, and really take into consideration how a PhD will help you with your career or your personal goals. And finally, kind of ask yourself if you can really dedicate at least 3 to 4 years of your life to this topic. And if that's something that you're really passionate about and you're really interested in, then by all means go for it. So I'm happy to take questions on this, either now or later during the panel discussion. But thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Deyl. It was very informative, and I hope everyone knows now the steps and the reasons for doing a PhD and what a PhD entails. Thank you very much. I think questions will be taken at the end during the panel discussion, only because of interesting time. So we're just going to follow through. Our next presenter is Faysal Farah. He's a second-year PhD student in medical imaging CDT on the medical imaging CDT program run jointly by KCL and ICL. Faysal has a master's degree in chemistry from the University of Bristol, and he's also worked as a medicinal chemist, and he's also our co-founder for Somali Academics. Faysal will be discussing the application process and how to go about applying for a PhD. So Faysal, I'll let you take over.
Yeah, okay. Thanks for the introduction, Maymoon. I'm just going to share my screen. Hi everyone, so my name is Faysal and today I'll be giving you a short talk on the PhD application process. Before I start, just a quick caveat in that this is by no means meant to be a detailed overview, rather it's just meant to be a brief overview of the PhD application process, and I'll make references to some sources I used to make these slides that you can look into later. Hopefully following on from the inspirational talks by both keynote speakers and also the very informative talk by Deyl, most of you are in a position where you actually are considering applying for a PhD program. So the first thing you probably would want to ask yourself is, where do I go about looking for these programs? Now, unfortunately, there isn't a centralized system like UCAS where all the PhD positions are advertised. And instead, what you tend to find is that the majority of PhD vacancies are advertised amongst various sources, and these can include the university website, the personal websites of academics, and in some cases even their Twitter accounts, and also on third-party websites like findingphd.com. I've highlighted this in green just to emphasize that this is actually a really useful resource to use. Most of the information I got from, the most information I got in my slides have come from this website itself. So it's really important for you guys to supplement this by having a look at this website. And then lastly, some universities do tend to have open days for PhD studies. And this is a really good opportunity to meet some of the academics and current PhD students. Cool. So now, now you know where to look for PhD programs. Another thing to consider is that there will be many hundreds, if not thousands, of projects that are advertised, which you could potentially apply for. So it's really important to try and narrow it down to only a handful of projects which you would want to consider. And try to keep it general and to give you some guidance in helping you narrow down the number of projects. A few things to probably consider is that you want to be as specific as you can in terms of the project you want to go into. So it's not enough to say, for example, you want to do a PhD in chemistry, for example, because chemistry itself is very diverse and there's so many different projects within that field in itself. And hopefully by the end of your undergraduate studies, you will have a better idea of one of the particular niche that you want to go into. Another thing to consider is that to look at the skills that the PhD provides you with. So for example, if you enjoy working in the lab, there's no real point in doing a computational based project because you will eat into the number of hours that you spend in the lab. So that's another thing you could consider. And then lastly, another thing to consider is that you need to have a passion in whatever project you're doing, whatever project you are applying for. And this is something I think Deyl alluded to before. 3 to 4 years is a very long time, and a PhD can be mentally draining. So you need that passion in order to have that resilience to carry on and actually complete your PhD program. And then another thing to also consider is ranking your PhD projects in order as well, just to help you really figure out what project you want to apply for. And you can rank them based on some of these factors. So the first one is to look at how helpful the supervisor is. I can't stress enough how important it is to be able to work in a group where you have a really useful supervisor. I've heard horror stories of people actually quitting their PhD programs because their relationship fell apart with their supervisors. Another thing to also consider is the dynamic of the group as well. You don't want to really work in a very competitive environment because quite often what will happen is that some students will actually refuse to help each other in an attempt to try and be better at the other person. Now they are rare, but there is the possibility of that happening. So don't feel put off by doing a PhD because of these 2 points. And later on, I'll talk about how you can actually gauge these 2 points when applying for a program. Another thing to also consider is the city. So I've mentioned before that doing PhD can be mentally draining. So you don't want to be in a position where you are far away from friends and family. Quite often you end up leaving the lab tired and you want to socialize with friends and family. So if you're doing a PhD in a remote part, then it's really difficult to be able to have a social life with friends and family. Now, I do take it that doing this can be quite a difficult task in terms of narrowing down your projects and also filtering them. So it's really important to try and make use of your current supervisors or mentors that you can access to, because they themselves would have been PhD students and they can advise you and even be more useful given that you might end up going into the same field as them. So it's really important to reach out to the supervisors of the projects that you are thinking about applying to. because it can give you the opportunity to actually go and visit their labs or visit their research office and actually speak to the students and engage as to the dynamics of the group. And the best way of normally doing this is to treat the email that you send to the supervisor as a cover letter where you introduce yourself and state why you're interested in that particular project. And it's also common practice to include a copy of your CV, as this will be your first point of contact. And if you leave off a good impression, that might work in your favor. So for example, a friend of mine, he was actually able to email a supervisor, go visit their labs, and because they really got along well during that session, the supervisor actually offered him a PhD position rather than having to apply formally, which is what tends to happen in most cases. So rather than just getting an offer by contacting the supervisor, you actually have to apply formally. And again, there isn't a generic guide for applying for a PhD program, and each university has their own subtle way of doing it. So you should consult the university in question. And then in terms of the interview process, now, again, they tend to vary based on disciplines, but generally speaking, what you tend to find is that you get called in for an interview where you have to present a research topic, discuss a research paper that they've given you beforehand, and also there'll be like a CV grading session where they talk about your experiences and your suitability to the actual position itself. So now I've covered both where to look, how to apply for a PhD program. Another thing people do want to consider is the financial burden placed upon yourself as a PhD student. So a lot of people are under the impression that all PhDs you have to fund yourself. And so it's not economically viable if you are not from an affluent family. So fortunately, what tends to be the case is that most PhD projects are preset and pre-funded. And by that, what I mean is that they, if you apply for the PhD program and you get given an offer, then you are automatically entitled to a PhD studentship. And I'll talk a bit more about that later on, what that actually means. But you get given a lump sum of money to support you with your PhD. Now, in some cases, you do have to actually make 2 applications. So you have to make an application to get accepted for a PhD program, and then make another one to actually apply for funding. Now, the university or the academic themselves will help you in applying for the funding for the relevant PhD. Now, PhD funding is normally available from a range of sources, and these can include research councils and also scholarships as well. And in some cases, they can even be self-funded. So so I've mentioned research councils as being one of the main sources of PhD funding. Now, research councils actually are part of the UKRI. So the UKRI is a national funding agency with the sole aim of trying to improve the research output within the UK. Now, the way they've done it is that they split themselves into 7 different research councils targeting different disciplines. So you can see it's quite varied in that they are funding projects in the arts and humanities and projects within even in medical research, for example. So what you tend to find out is that most PhD applications that you apply for, they will either be fully funded by the UKRI or partially funded by the UKRI. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Now, in terms of how much funding you get, so the numbers I got on here are for PhD studentships awarded by the UKRI. You do tend to get a bit more if you get given a scholarship, for example. But that's the majority of PhDs are funded by PhD studentships. So the lump sum of money that they give you to fund your PhD program covers your PhD tuition fee. So that's the money you have to pay to the university to be able to use their facilities and actually get a PhD from them. And then they also give you a doctoral tax-free stipend, which is approximately 15,000. Now that does vary depending on what you're doing the PhD. So if you're doing a PhD in London, what tends to happen is that you get given an extra bit of money to account for the fact that rent prices in London are extortionate in pricing. So, I've also mentioned how much that equates to pre-tax as well. So a lot of people are put off doing a PhD because they feel like they are making significantly less money than their peers who are going off to grad schemes. But you can actually see that pre-tax, you are not far off from what most of your peers are earning. And then there's also the opportunity to earn more money by doing teaching and lab demonstrations. And that's another thing to consider as well. Now, in addition to giving you a stipend, PhD studentships also cover additional support, so consumables. So this is money you get to spend on going on conferences abroad, doing training programs within the UK, even abroad. And in some cases, you can also use some of that money to do placements at other institutions. Now, in some cases, universities do tend to fund PhDs through CDT programs. Now, CDT stands for Center for Doctoral Training. So this is a 4-year PhD program, which is typically split into a 1+3 model, where you spend the first year of the PhD doing a master's. So if you have already done a master's, you end up getting another master's. And the funding is that you get paid as if you're a PhD student for each of the years. So you, in essence, get paid to get a master's in your first year. Now, CDTs differ from normal PhDs in that you have that additional one year where it's heavily focused on training you to become the next generation of research scientists. And you join as a cohort of students from various different disciplines. So if your CDT is a interdisciplinary project, for example, then you tend to go in as a cohort full of people from different disciplines, which is really important, especially in terms of networks as well. So you get to make friends and collaborate with people from different disciplines, which will help you progress through your career. Another thing to also note with CDTs is that the funding is tied to you rather than the project. So what that means is that there's room for changing the direction of your project. So a lot of times PhDs are funded by industries, for example, and they tend to have a specific program that you have to do research for. So you're given a project to work on, and you are not allowed to do anything else. Whereas with CDTs, what tends to happen is the money is tied to you, so your supervisor will have a project in mind for you. But if you find out that it's not something you really enjoy doing and you would rather do something else or take it from a different approach. So for example, if you're doing a project which is heavily lab-based, but you prefer doing a computational project, then there's room for scope in changing the format of your PhD project. So that's another thing to bear in mind when you're deciding whether or not to go into a straight PhD program or doing a CDT instead. Now, applying for a PhD can be quite competitive, and a lot of the funding that is provided by the UKRI means that the PhD will have to be done within a UK institution. So you can go off to the States or Europe, for example, to do your PhD and get funding from the UKRI. And because of the competitive nature, a lot of the time, these positions are merit-based. So typically, in order to have a really good chance of getting both the PhD project and also the funding, you tend to want to aim for 2-1 or higher in order to be considered for the studentships on the PhD project. And then lastly, the UKRI also funds EU citizens. So I'm a Dutch citizen myself, and I was able to get funding through the UKRI. However, this might change depending on Brexit. So it's worth to keep this in mind when you're looking for PhD programs. Now, in terms of deadlines, so there isn't a global deadline for applying for PhD programs. Some are accepted all year round. However, I do recommend that you start looking as soon as possible. Typically, PhDs tend to be filled up around the Christmas period. And with CDTs, for example, they tend to have 2 rounds. So the first round finishes Christmas, and the second round finishes around February, March times. So if you are considering doing a PhD, it's probably worthwhile starting as soon as possible. Now, if you do happen to find yourself not having secured a PhD program late in the year, I wouldn't worry too much, because there is a good chance that some PhD positions are still available. So for example, in my case, I actually ended up applying after I graduated because I wasn't sure if I wanted to do a PhD. And literally a month after I graduated, this PhD that I'm doing now opened up as a position. So I applied for that. So there is a chance to apply for a program later in the year, but I wouldn't risk that, and I would rather apply as soon as possible. Now, the last slide, I've included some of the resources that I think are quite useful for you guys to use to supplement the information you got from my slides. Now, the first thing to consider is to speak to your supervisors. It's really important to make use of them, because they will be experts in the field that you probably want to go into. So it's worthwhile having a talk with them and seeing whether or not the project you are applying for is actually a good fit for you. Another thing to consider is also using findaphd.com. So I mentioned that before. So this is actually a really good website. Most PhD positions are advertised on that, and then you get more information in terms of different types of PhD programs you can apply for. So for example, doing a CBT or doing a straight up PhD program. And then also it's worthwhile trying to attend university open days. Now I do note that given the recent outbreak of the virus, a lot of universities are not doing open days in the same format they used to do in the past, but I think some of them are doing virtual open days. And in this case, it might work in your favor because it means you don't have to travel to another city when you want to look into these open days. And that brings me on to the end of my slides. So I'd like to thank you all for listening to my talk. I do have questions, but I think we're going to answer them as part of the panel discussions because we have a few PhD students who can also supplement these slides. So thank you, guys.
Thank you very much, Faysal. Very interesting indeed. I hope everybody got all their answers, questions answered about the PhD application. Now we're going to move on to panel where we will have several speakers. Some have already gave a talk, such as Dr. Fahima Idiris and Dr. Abdimajid. Osman. We will also have Amran, Deyl again, and Faysal, Aida, Dr. Kaltum, Abdiaziz, and Ibrahim. Welcome all. So I'm just going to kickstart with a general question. If you could give one piece of advice to your younger self just starting a PhD, what would that be? So anyone can take the floor.
Okay, I would say read as much as you can. It's something you regret when you're writing your thesis, is to do your literature research early on. So that's what I would suggest, is read. And yeah, just read, I think. And don't stress your first year. Don't stress too much in your first year. That's what I would suggest.
Dr. Abdimajid, do you have anything to contribute to that?
Sorry, I missed the question. The question was...
Oh, if you... let me go back to it. You could give one piece of advice to your younger self just starting your PhD. So yeah, at the beginning stage, what advice would you give yourself?
Yeah, the beginning stage. Yeah, at the beginning stage, normally it used to be very confusing, everything, I guess. But I think, as I said, a good start is to read as much as possible, and to prepare for the task ahead. I think that's the simple answer. But I think also it's quite difficult to give a general recommendation, because it depends on the environment. If you are in a good research environment, then I think everything will be quite smooth. So it might depend on the environment, but prepare as much as possible. That's the simple answer.
Definitely. Let's hear from the other new speakers. So Ibrahim, what would you say to that question? How would you respond?
So, like, where for me, I did most of my PhD. So I'm second year of my PhD now. Yeah. So when it came to choosing my topic, it was a continuation of my master's project. And when I decided whether to continue to do PhD, it was a funny story. I was in Somalia at the time, and at the time I wasn't sure whether I should continue in my academic career or do industry like most other chemical engineers at the time. But it was eye-opening because I was in Badia for like 3 to 4 weeks, and it was in this time where I actually decided, contemplated on or thought with the idea of doing a PhD much. And yeah, so actually it was a lot about reading my topic in Badia for several weeks. on my Kindle, that's when I actually thought a PhD is something that I could actually do. So that's when I really thought it. Yeah.
Definitely. I think because you're really committing your life, 4 years of your life, to a program. So you want to be sure that, you know, that's the right thing for you, isn't it?
Yes.
Definitely. Dr. Fahima, do you have anything to add to that?
I think I would say make sure you write down things, because at the beginning of your PhD, a lot of people will suggest maybe different techniques, or you'll hear a lot of terms and you don't really understand what they mean. And it's quite easy to forget those things. And then after a few years, you're like, oh yeah, I've heard that before. So just keep a notepad with you and a pen, especially when you go see your supervisor. Even if you don't understand what it means, just write it down and then just Google it. And then you essentially have that there. Otherwise you would just forget, and then you'll realize, and it's a bit too late to try and do that afterwards.
Definitely, definitely. Aida, hello.
Hi.
Do you have anything to add to that as well?
Well, I'm still kind of like in my first year-ish, but I guess if there's one thing I could kind of tell myself when I was applying, which was like late last year and early this year, yeah, just go into like, I think when I went to like PhD open events and stuff like that, I noticed that I was literally the only, like either the only hijabi or like the only Black student there, and I was like, oh God, do I even belong here? And I think you kind of have to get past that and realize you actually do deserve to be there. So I think if that's one thing I would tell my younger self, it's that you deserve to be there as much as anyone else, and you need to really get past the internalized racism. So yeah, and I really like the reading tip. I think that's another really useful point that I would tell myself too.
Yeah, basically get over the fear of thinking you're not worthy enough, sort of thing. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah. Faysal, would you like to add anything to that?
Do you mind repeating the question again? Sorry, I didn't get it.
So any piece of advice you would give yourself if you're just starting your PhD right now? Third year now.
No, I just started my second year now because I did a CDT thing. But I mean, I'm still early on through my PhD program. But I think one thing which I would tell myself, and I'm still trying to convince myself now, is to be patient and have faith that everything will piece together. So like I'm doing bits and bobs here and there, and I don't see how all of this is going to help me get a thesis at the end of it as well. And I do tend to panic a lot. But I think it's just have patience and trust Allah and have qadr, and yeah, just trust the qadr of Allah. So that's one thing I would say, yeah.
Definitely. Mohamed Abdullahi.
Hi.
Hello.
I doubt I'll have anything more to add. I think everything's been
mentioned.
Mentioned. Yeah.
Can I add one more?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's about to be the only hijab wearing person at the lab, or the only Black person in the department. I think that's something we all feel in this society, in this Western society that we are living in. But I think that's a fact. That's something existing. But I think we have to, at the same time, we need not to think too much about that. We need to be ourselves and to try to be equal to everybody else. I think that's the best way to go forward. Not always think about how you look or something like that. I would say that it is important that you just be yourself and think like that you are not you are as good as everyone else, or even better.
Definitely. So we'll go next to the next question. We'll go into the next question. How was your PhD experience? Was the culture more cooperative or competitive?
Does anyone want to kickstart? I can kind of make a bit of a comparison there. So I initially did like my BSc degree in biology, and I kind of then moved on to global health, which is a bit more social sciencey. And I think now it's a bit more, life sciences can be very competitive, like even natural sciences. And I think going to social science and it's a bit more, yes, definitely I would say a bit more cooperative, and like everyone's doing their own thing, but like at the same time, we can kind of come together and discuss ways and like how global health agenda could be met and with more research. And I think just giving out different points of view, I think, yeah, it's definitely more cooperative and more of a team. It's more teamwork than it is, don't even know how to describe it. Yeah, but I think it's definitely more teamwork oriented, if that makes sense.
Definitely. Kaltum, would you like to add anything to that once you finished?
Well, I think it depends on your group. So my group, I was lucky that it was more cooperative and we were working as a group. But it also depends on your project. My project in particular, I mean, I'll talk about it more tomorrow, but it was completely different to the rest of the group. So I was more on my own than anybody else in the group, and whereas all the other individuals were working on a bigger project. So, but I mean, the expertise are there. You always have something that links you to the group. So yeah, I mean, it's more of a teamwork, I would say. Yeah.
Okay. Dr. Abdimajid, Osman, do you have anything to add to that? Since you've worked with Kate, you worked with different people. Was it a competitive environment?
In my case, no, I would say no. But I have heard that there exists that kind of competitiveness. I have heard that. So as I said before, every research environment is different to others. So I remember when I was an undergraduate student, and I was attending a cancer lecture, and the teacher said that the best way to avoid cancer is to choose your parents. I remember that still. So the best way to avoid that is to choose a good supervisor
100%.
with good leadership. Yeah.
I mean, I can add to that. Research group I work with had a good level of camaraderie, and no competitiveness. I think it's the opposites. They work together, and people have this impression that PhD students know a lot. When I was working with PhD students as a master's student, working with software that are a bit sophisticated, you learn off each other. So we'll be sharing your experiences, and they'll be teaching you as well. And I think it's more cooperative than competition.
Definitely. So does anyone else want to add?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Because I think someone else asked this question as well. But so I think this is more focused towards Dr. Kaltum, because so I remember I had a conversation with you a while ago about your experiences doing a PhD, seeing that you almost finished at the time, and I think you had like you were quite adamant that you wanted to leave academia, but then now, mashallah, you're doing a postdoc. So I was wondering, like, has your viewpoint changed? Like in hindsight, would you still have done the PhD again?
PhD, yes. I think I overall, I enjoyed my experience. I think, like a lot of people doing their PhDs, I had quite a few hurdles. I had to move universities, and so it was a journey for me. But I think what made me really like my experience was my project. I've always liked research. So, but yeah, so I think PhD, I would definitely. I won't do a second one, but I would do the one that I would do it if I were. I mean, yeah. But postdoc. So the reason I'm doing a postdoc is one, I like the research, and two, the guy who offered to me, I know him, really chill guy, and I think it was more the environment I was going into rather than the project is interesting. But yeah, so I think it was influenced more by the people I was going to work with rather than anything else. I mean, academia still, it's not for me. I think after watching my own supervisor and all the challenges she had to go through, not only as a woman, but as a young academic, yeah, it's not for me personally. But yeah, so I think I'm doing and it's a short postdoc, so that's also why I'm doing it. I'm not tying myself to any lengthy piece of contract, you know? So yeah, hope that
I guess that also shows the importance of choosing a really good research group to work in as well, because they can influence
exactly.
Your career.
It really can influence your entire PhD journey. So I know people who have suffered as a consequence of their supervisors. I've seen people who've loved their experience and loved the academia because of their supervisors. So it's all about experiences, I think. Yeah.
That was exactly what I meant, choosing your parents.
That's exactly. Yeah, it can make or break you. Yeah.
Yes.
That's true.
Definitely. Someone asked, when would you suggest for a current PhD to start looking or thinking about applying for a postdoc position? At what point in this PhD? So I think Kaltum and Fahima.
I think at the beginning of your third year, finding a postdoc can be very difficult because the funding, I mean, it depends if you know who you want to work for and you're willing to apply for that funding, it can take between 6 months to a year to secure the funding. So you need to start thinking about it in your third year, I'd say. If you're just planning on applying for advertised positions, again, in your third year, because positions will become available, they'll be advertised, and then you just won't hear about them again. So it can be a bit of a stressful situation to be in. So I think look early on, try and meet people at conferences just so that you have an idea of what they're like, talk to their PhD students and their postdocs, ask certain questions, which can sort of allow you to get an insight into the group. So I'd always ask about working hours, ask about publications in terms of how the group works and how it's managed, and having a year to do that and get all that research is quite important. I wouldn't leave it right to the end when you're writing your thesis, because you need to really focus on writing the thesis at that point and finishing up any experiments that you might have left.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm slightly different. I think, did you ask the postdoc or when applying for PhDs?
At what point, postdoc, at what point do you decide to apply or think about applying for a postdoc position?
So my current postdoc came, like I said, it was connections. So I was towards my end of I was writing my thesis, and the academic that I'm working for right now just offered it to me. So because I've worked with him previously in my PhD, so he knows about my my expertise and what I can do and what I can offer to his group. So it came really sudden, and it was a connection. So like Fahima and I think other people have mentioned, connections is really, and networking is really important.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I got offered my postdoc. My PhD supervisor told me that this academic that I'd met before had a postdoc, and he was happy for me to work with him, and all I had to do was contact him. I spoke to him and he offered it to me straight away. So it was through a connection. So, I mean, it's really important to network, but don't really rely on those connections. Try to have some groundwork in case that doesn't happen for you, because it doesn't happen for everyone. We've been very fortunate, alhamdulillah, to have those experiences. But obviously a lot of work went into that, and meeting people over the years and making sure you make the right impression, and they obviously think you're a good fit for their group and they know your background.
Okay, thank you. There was a question for Dr. Osman. Someone said, how did your upbringing in Somalia affect your education aspirations and your desire to work in academia?
Yes, I would say in a way, yes. When I was growing up in Somalia in the 70s, I think, as I mentioned, there were very few children that were going to school. So it was a privilege to go to school. And I remember I loved the school and education, and that was the case almost all other children that were going to school. So it was a great opportunity to go to school. So I think that shaped my desire to get education and so on. And when I came to Europe, to Sweden, the only thing that was in mind was to get more education and more education. So yes, that formed my desire to get education. And I see that Somali children now born in Europe are not, unfortunately, thinking of the same of the same way. I see many Somali children are getting education as you hear, but I see also many other kids that are not valuing education, unfortunately. Yeah. So yes, I think my early education in Somali formed me. Yes.
Your drive.
Yeah.
Definitely. Someone said, what steps or ways would you suggest one should take on in investigating how they're finding a new potential supervisor? How do they find a new supervisor, basically?
Yes, it's quite difficult, particularly if you just know that you want to get PhD, but you don't know which supervisor you will get. You probably you will not know. But I think it's a good idea to make some own little research or investigation on what environment you will do your PhD, because I have seen and I have heard a lot of stories about bad environments and good environments. So the environment that you are coming is very critical. Your supervisor's leadership, and it's all about leadership. His or her leadership is critical, and it will make your PhD either successful or less successful. So I think it's quite a good idea to make some little research and see what the person is, and what about how many of his or her former PhD students have succeeded in academia. That's a way to look things. If you see a supervisor that no one of his former students are professors or have made a career in academia or anywhere else, then that is a warning signal. But if you see a supervisor that his or her students have made successes somewhere else, then probably he is or she is a good supervisor. So make some research first. Yeah.
Definitely. Thank you very much. I think Aida and Mohamed are just starting their PhDs. How's your experience so far?
So I guess finding a supervisor was a bit tricky for me last year, because you might find a really great supervisor, but I don't know, if there's certain limitations to your actual research ideas, like whether or not you can be allowed to carry out overseas research, or like if there's any ethical issues, then they won't be able to support you with that. Or similarly, you might find I don't know, you might find a supervisor that it like can help you out, but their research idea, like their research interest is not completely aligned with yours, and it can be difficult because I think, as someone mentioned earlier, like you might end up teaching your own research to your own supervisor, and I think that could be a bit challenging. I mean, that could happen either way. But one way I kind of found my supervisor was first, like you kind of need to get your research ideas first. So like do a little bit of literature review, do a bit of literature research. One way you can sort of find the perfect supervisor is by, if you find a paper that you really like and it's like really aligned to what you want to do, just have a look at the authors in the paper and see like what the institution might be. If you're lucky and they're like to a university that you want to go to, either in like the UK or like abroad, or if it's like right in your backyard or whatever, because I found my author, like the author of that paper was at QMUL, where I previously did my other master's. So I sent them an email and I said like, hi, could I have like a discussion about my research ideas? And obviously, because I was because my research is going to be like primarily on like health systems in Somalia and how like political instability and governance can affect how health is performed back home. Obviously, like limitations to like whether or not you can carry out your overseas research. So I think have that first and then bring that to your potential supervisor. And if they can support that, then go for it. And if they can't, then I guess move on. Does that make sense?
Definitely. Definitely.
Yeah, I think I'd say mine's slightly different. Got referred to a supervisor by my master's supervisor. I really liked my master's project, and at the end of my master's project, I registered interest that I wanted to pursue a PhD. And they at the time, graduate from Manchester, at the time there wasn't any funding going on there, and they referred to me to other departments at the universities. So what you got to know is as well is not necessary. For example, if a university offers astrophysics undergraduate, wouldn't mean that they'll be doing astrophysics research in a postgraduate level. So you've got to identify departments that do across the country that go next step in terms of specialism. And also, as Aida mentioned, you identify literature that you kind of like, you feel comfortable with, and you think you can do, and you see yourself doing, and look at the authors, and then try and identify the supervisors, and you can even approach them directly, register interest. And even sometimes you get supervisors that tell you about PhD that they might advertise in the future. So you get that little advantage, give you insight, I'm going to be advertising a PhD in a few months' time. And yeah, basically.
Definitely.
If I can add,
yes.
If I can add into this as well. So I've got three supervisors. My primary supervisor was my master's supervisor, and my PhD was a continuation of a project that I did in my master's. One of the supervisors is international supervisor who's in prestigious university in Saudi Arabia. And how I found him was PhDs that I applied when I was applying for PhDs 2 years ago. And I interviewed with him, shown interest in the project. This is in the same field of research that I'm doing now. And then the opportunity came up to collaborate with him as well. So this is a way to like choose your own supervisors. I think most PhDs, you get to choose one supervisor and the second supervisor will be given to you. So I've got three supervisors, two that I chose, and one that the university gave it to me.
Definitely. I know that Mohamed and Aida attended our event last year. Did you know there was as much Somali PhD students before attending this event?
No, I did not.
I
did not know at all.
Okay, that's cool. So how did that event, help you and make you more confident in applying for a PhD?
So go ahead.
PhD can come across a bit exclusive. I think it's closed off. And for example, my geoscience, my undergraduate level, I was the only Black person in doing an undergraduate degree at Manchester. So, and even if you think about a PhD level, even more exclusive. So, seeing this, I was thinking about a PhD project. Seeing this gave me that extra push to try and actually put applications in. Yeah, and I was lucky enough to get one.
Definitely.
Yeah, so when I mentioned earlier that I felt quite out of place going to like these open events like at universities, and then when I came to this event, before I came, I was like, oh, you know what? I don't even think I'm gonna. I feel like I felt really out of place, and I know that can be a bit debilitating, even though that's something that you definitely need to overcome before you start thinking about applying for a PhD. But I think coming to this event definitely gave me the push. I was very inspired. I remember there was a talk by Hassan last year as well, and I think that was very, yeah, that was very like, it was definitely what kind of just motivated me and pushed me towards applying. I didn't even know about CDTs and DTPs either, because that's definitely an interesting approach if your research is very interdisciplinary. Oh my god. And you kind of like want to branch from one field to another. So because of the event last year, I'm now doing my MRes plus PhD, which is really great. So yeah, thank you again so much to everyone behind Somali Academics.
Definitely, you're welcome. We're happy that we're seeing a lot of Somali PhD students and prospective students applying. Honestly, that's the whole reason why Somali Academics was set up. And yeah, it's great, mashallah. I just wanted to quickly ask Deyl, so you managed to secure a PhD program without having to apply formally. How did that go?
Hi, sorry, yeah. I think the theme has been touched upon quite a lot already throughout this event, and it's connections. It's who you know, and how like they can help you kind of fulfill your career goals, but also they can like get on with their research as well, because a lot of the supervisors they end up building networks with other supervisors at different universities, and I happen to kind of get on well with one of my supervisors at King's, and once I started my master's project, I found a supervisor that knew that old supervisor, and they had a good relationship as well. So he recommended me for a project, and that ended up turning into a PhD, and that was that. And I didn't really have to go through the whole application process of interviews and submitting CVs, cover letters, all those formalities. So yeah, so that's one thing I say is never underestimate the connections that you can make and their impacts on your life, because they can really change your life overnight. So yeah.
Definitely. So I've got a question for Ibrahim Noor. Given now there's a lot of PhD projects that are affected by COVID, how have you adapted to reduce lab time? Did it impact your project?
Yes, like I think for 4 to 5 months of this year, I was out of the lab. But then in the same time, I had a lot of writing literature review papers that me and the supervisors planned for. So we had to find new ways to spend this time away from the lab. Also, we tried to change our research project in a way that is no longer extremely lab-based. I think because my background is material science, so I think 90% of the time I'm in the lab, other than that when I'm not writing. So now we try to run most of our experiments remotely, and then the data we get back, learning ways to use softwares to analyze that data. So we were trying to figure out this new world that we live in and how to go about it in a new way that's more productive than before.
100%, 100%. So I've got a question for Kaltum as well. I know that because sometimes supervisors, they can just pick up a job anywhere. You're that PhD student that, you're lost and now you have to follow your supervisor. They can, I don't know, I've got a friend that had to move all the way to Leeds. So I know, Kaltum, you've changed institution. How did that impact your project progression?
So I luckily it was just from East London to West London. So it wasn't a crazy move, but I had to set up. So I was in a weird predicament because I was essentially the most senior person in the group. And it was in my 3rd year, so it was towards the end of my PhD. So I had to move, set up a new lab. And I also, as a result, had to switch directions in my PhD. because I could no longer do the same experiments that I was able to do in Queen Mary. But it was a very strange time because I had to set up a lab essentially and try to carry on with my experiments as much as I can. But so I would have kind of like the COVID scenario for some of you guys now. I would have months where I would just sit on my desk because nothing is ready for me to use. But I mean, I still had a lot of literature to read and a whole backlog of results to analyze. So it's just a matter of adapting to your situation. But yeah, it was a challenge, but you just deal with it. Yeah, that's literally
Definitely.
it.
Thank you very much. So, Amran, I think that you fixed your mic.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Do you want to repeat the question or?
Oh yeah, so I was saying basically, my project's quite interdisciplinary. So even though it's in mechanical engineering right now, it's not that like obvious that it's not very similar to chemistry. And so I still use a lot of like chemical techniques in my PhD now. So it's not really that much of a big jump between the two fields.
Definitely. So in the interest of time, and Salah just came on in England. I just wanted to ask one last question. It's a general question for everyone. Should Somali researchers find ways to contribute to Somalia? Who wants to go first?
Definitely. For me, I think I wouldn't have done a PhD if I didn't go back to Somalia. So as it is the case, then I feel like that's where I got my inspiration. 100% I'll be going back and return the favor somehow. It might not be now or in the nearby future, but definitely at one point in my life.
Definitely.
I just want to point out to that geoscience is quite a big field, and it's a shame that there's not many Somalis do it. It's very niche, and it's one of them subjects that you look everything around you in terms of resources, minerals, your phone, everything really, and geoscience is right at the center, geology is right at the center, and every advanced society depend on them. To see that not many Somalis pursue it, and considering it's a very well balanced subject as well. It overlaps with physics, chemistry, biology, and it suits anyone that would like science, and you get to go to the field as well, travel a lot, and simply we are background nomads and stuff like that, traveling around areas, going to the wild, looking at outcrops. It suits Somalia, so it's one of them ones, and it's something that is badly needed back home as well. We've got plenty of exploitable resources, from renewables to oil and gas, offshore, onshore, minerals, all of that. So I think, yeah, absolutely.
Definitely. Anyone else wants to add to that quickly?
So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to go into global health as well, because if you look at how like medicine, science, technology is advancing, Somalia is like one of the countries that are really behind on meeting the Sustainable Development Goals, and they previously didn't meet any of the Millennium Development Goals for health. So, and obviously like there's a lot of influences like you know, like political and structural influences, even like issues like systemic racism and imperialism and capitalism. So I think one of the reasons why I really want to look into that's because, you know, it affects basically our community, affects us back home, and how we're doing with COVID as well. So yeah, that's one of the reasons I think Somali academics should probably think about looking at researching the climate back home as well.
Can I add something? First, I would like to say I belong to the older generation, and my generation have run out of ideas. So our only hope is you guys who are younger, and you are the future of the Somali people. So it's very heartwarming to see all of you in different areas, from chemistry to social science, and that's very promising. Regarding to research and so on to Somalia, as someone mentioned, there's very little, but I would like to tell you that at the moment it's the best for Somalia is that you focus your education and PhD studies and so on, and then hopefully after, when you get older and so on, contribute to your country of origin. But at the moment it's best that you focus your education.
Yeah, gain more experience.
Yes.
Definitely. I'm so sorry. I'm sure there's so many questions that are coming in, but we will send them to each respective speaker, and hopefully you'll get all the answers to your questions, and we will answer them on Twitter as well. I just want to conclude here. I'm going to pass it over to Ibrahim, our co-founder of Somali Academics, and he'll be closing this event today.
Thank you very much, Maymoon. You've done an excellent job presenting. So I just want to say that, yeah, it's great presentation.
Yeah.
I just want to say thank you to the rest of my team, Iman, Nasra, Deyl, who else? Amran, obviously Faysal, who is leading this. You guys have done a wonderful job putting this together. It's a little bit different from last year, right, where it was just me and Faysal. But it's great. You know, we've got great guests today with us today. Abdimajid's talk, very inspiring, with a little bit of a twist, you know, humble upbringing from Somalia and coming to Europe and establishing sort of a lab. Dr. Fahima, Idiris, which I actually went to same university as you, QM. I think I started a year later. But again, very empowering in terms of keeping to your core values and beliefs and making sure that, you know, that comes ahead of everything else. So I think I'll speak on behalf of all of us and say that actually was a very inspiring and to hear, because a lot of people struggle to maintain those two. Obviously Deyl with what a PhD is and why to do one. Again, a great, amazing talk. You know, a lot of people don't actually know why they want to do it. Sometimes they just want to do it. So hopefully his talk should have cleared up a lot of questions that people wanted answers to. Again, Faysal and how to apply for a PhD. Again, essential information on funding. And then, yeah, the rest of the panel discussion as well. We had Mohamed, Ibrahim, Amran, who joined in, and Dr. Kaltum. So thank you very much for all of you guys for sort of spending your weekend in inspiring not only us, but others who are thinking about doing a PhD. So tomorrow, we're starting at 2 p.m. It will last for an hour, just under 2 hours. And we've got, again, great list of guests and speakers. We've got Surair Mohamed from Cambridge, Ikram Abdi, Dr. Kaltum will be joining us again tomorrow. And then we've got an addition of Dr. Arif Hamid, who's from across the pond. So hopefully all of you guys can sort of join us and take part in the second part of this series. And yes, if there are any questions from the viewers and listeners that want to be asked to some of the guests and speakers from today, then we are able to pass that information and questions on, and we'll get those answered for you ASAP. But yeah, Maghrib's come in, so I just want to finish there. And I'd say thank you very much for joining Somali Academics this evening.